Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and I'm really happy to be here with Fern Schumer Chapman, author, because today we're going to be, of course, pursuing another segment that we've been starting, which has to do with answering questions from our viewers. So this segment is going to be called, Is It My Fault? Because I think a lot of times we do get triggered, and what happens sometimes is we're triggered because of other people's behaviors. And what we really want to do is demystify some of this to make that we can understand what is happening within us and how to further empower ourselves. So we certainly do want to, of course, answer some questions from our viewers. And one of the questions we have that we really want to ask is, what are some constructive ways to deal with in-laws whose bullying behaviors trigger the same sickening emotions that I had years ago with some people in grade school? So this is one of our viewers that had asked this question, and we had left with one of our previous videos on some of the material, but we wanted to really take the time today to answer some of that. So thank you so much for being here, Fern.
Always great to be with you. And triggering is a topic I am something of an expert in because I was raised in a difficult home, and I discovered in adulthood that I probably was coping with about 20 triggers a day, which meant that I had to find ways to get on top of it so that I could live my life. And that's not easy to do. I had so many triggers that even turning on the television became difficult for me. I could not listen to a hockey game with volume up. And the reason was that it brought back all the chaos and the noise from my childhood. I can now do that. I still don't like it too loud, but I don't have to inflict no volume on whoever's sitting next to me.
Absolutely. We eventually come to learn more about ourselves and see in some ways how we can best manage in obviously difficult situations.
Well, part of the problem with triggers, John, is people have no awareness that they're actually being triggered. And so the first step is going, oh my gosh, I'm actually reacting to something that happened years ago, not what's happening right this second. And that is a skill in itself.
You're absolutely right. And I really like what you said there, because that helps us to segue into what I like to call identifying the negative core belief, right? And, it's really important that we do recognize when we do get triggered, because what happens is that that some feelings that are unresolved in our lives can end up creeping back up again in the present. And that's essentially what the EMDR theory states. In other words, that the younger you's emotions pop back up and demand resolution.
Well, and a good indicator of whether or not you're having a trigger is to become aware of how anxiety lodges itself in your body. So in my case, I have a hard time breathing deeply. I have shallow breathing. Some people have stomach aches. Some people get headaches. Whatever it is, you have to begin the process of scanning your body to recognize, oh, I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling anxious. And those triggers are starting to come out.
Absolutely. And it's really important to recognize what's going on within your body. And I find that it's really important to identify that prevailing negative belief. It's about self-knowledge, about recognizing what's going on. And, some examples of some negative core beliefs could be, I'm not good enough, I'm defective, I'm not safe, I'm not in control, or some other type of negative belief, right? And I find that once you identify that negative belief, then it becomes easier to recognize how and when it affects us in different areas of our lives, right? So it's this ability to objectify that can help us to step outside of the situation and see it more for what it is, being a trigger.
That brings me to 2 points. One is developing a third eye, which is something we've talked about before. This idea that you take yourself outside of yourself and watch how you're reacting to certain situations. Yep. The other piece I wanted to mention is I think of these things as bookends. So something's happening right this second, and it's activating feelings within me. and responses within me, which probably are tied to core beliefs, but also perhaps to incidents that happened many decades ago. So the question is, what are the bookends?
Yep.
What is happening now and what happened then?
Yep. You're absolutely right. And usually, if we do a bit of introspection on what that belief is, it's usually in one of three categories, right? It's usually lack of control, lack of security, or a sense of over responsibility. So I think that that's really, really important just to kind of add that so our viewers can understand like where they can dig, especially, you know. And another strategy that I have that I think helps to find some of these negative core beliefs is to ask the question, what does it mean when they treat me this way? What does it say about me when they do that? And if you persist with this type of questioning, what ends up happening is as you come up with an I statement, you should see what the prevailing negative belief really is.
You know, you mentioned those three things. I think they were lack of control,
lack of security, and over responsibility.
Those three characteristics are absolutely what childhood is all about. So these particular experiences are very rooted in those feelings in childhood.
Absolutely, and that's very true. It oftentimes starts in childhood, you know, and it can carry on later on in our lives if it's left unresolved, you know. So, you know, I think that this leads us to that second part of dealing with in-laws, right? So, you know, we talked about what we can do with in-laws in a previous episode, so I'm not going to get too much into that again. But there are still some good actionable pieces of advice that we can recommend with regards to bullying behavior, you know. And I always recommend to ask yourself if a situation requires no response, finding your voice, you know, or planning an exit, which is taking space essentially from a toxic family member, be it an in-law or otherwise, right?
Breathe before reacting. You know, take a breath.
Yeah, essentially that's all it is. I think that a lot of times if you recognize that and you can step out of it, we're talking about objectifying again, right? When you're taking your breath, you are objectifying. So you're able to look at the big picture without letting it consume you completely. So, you know, so the strategies that we talked about in some ways with regards to that, you know, in terms of perhaps having no response, you know, I think that being quiet is a strategy unto itself, especially if in-laws are saying you're doing something to kind of elicit a reaction on our part, right? And by not giving them what they want, you end up directing the situation in a different direction altogether. You know, I find that finding our voice implies denouncing what has been said, which is also very important. In some cases, silence is good. In other cases, being able to speak out is going to be especially helpful. So perhaps if people in the family tend to go with what they say, you know, developing our response voice can be a way to work with shaking up a dysfunctional family system, because oftentimes that's what happens, right? A lot of people will enable and just go with what the other person says, right? So there's that.
And yeah, that's the tricky part. When do you speak up and when do you keep quiet? And that's a topic we can get into in another episode, but that's a long discussion that's difficult to resolve.
I agree. I agree that it can take time to do that, but at least what you're doing is you're focusing on what's within your control, right? And that's the thing that can be important, because the first step in empowerment is to denounce what's happened. So sometimes finding your voice is the strategy to have, especially if you haven't been speaking up or other people have been speaking over you and such, or and this causes all sorts of power dynamic issues within the family, right? So if a family system is just too strong, you know, even to voice our opposition by silence or to speak our truth and such, you know, then it may be time to focus on establishing boundaries by taking space and leaving a family function or a family or sibling relationship altogether as well, you know. So that's very important.
You know, the thing that we kind of glossed over that I'd like to go back to is that these triggers are can be very broad. And sometimes they seem very unlinked, but often there's an umbrella. So it's important to recognize the triggers, identify them, categorize them, name them, and actually take notice and practice responses and actually train for situations like the one that our viewer asked about.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. I think that that's really, really important to be able, of course, to engage in what you said in terms of training ourselves. You know, that's very, very important, right? And that's key. If something is, if people have a takeaway for today, it's especially that, to be able to train ourselves to become better so we don't end up letting things play themselves out as much. So let's talk about strengthening positive beliefs. That's the third part here that is really important. And when a negative core belief is reduced or eliminated, usually the corresponding positive belief automatically rises. And that's the theory in EMDR, of course. So if your belief is, I'm not good enough, then the opposing positive belief would be something like, I'm sufficient, or I'm okay just the way I am, right?
I think that we've talked about this, but you can actually create a list on one side of those negative core beliefs and then counter them on the positive side to talk back to them.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that that's really important. You can, of course, use that on some regard to be able to, of course, work with the both of them and to remember to say that to yourself. And a good way to reduce the power of the negative belief about ourselves is to start to personify an image of what the positive belief would look like. So you can work on the thought-based level, like you're mentioning, Fern, but you can also work on an active imagination-based level as well. You know, so if you're thinking of the positive belief and personifying that in an image of a person that would act that way, what are the qualities of the person who is sufficient or okay just the way they are? And can you attach that to past behaviors that you recognize in yourself? Because that's really important. If you see that you've been able to do that, you know, on a positive level in your past, then you can certainly connect with that same experience of empowerment you've had within yourself to be able to bring that back to the present, right?
And so often we take personally things that are not about us, and yeah, triggering certainly has a role in that. So I think it's important to remember that when people become hostile or aggressive or bullying, it speaks much more about them than who you are.
Absolutely. And that's really important to give back to the other person what is theirs. You're absolutely right. It's true that that's what happens, and that's important that people recognize that it's not about them. And that's what we're talking about, over responsibility, a little bit earlier. Some people have that, and that falls into personalization, which is what we've talked about also in past episodes. So I think that this is really important. So these, how do those skills and past images transfer to situations with your sibling or your in-laws? That's the next step that I recommend. Once people personify that image, connect it to the past in terms of successes they've had in bringing that and experiencing that, seeing how you can, of course, work with that in your current situation with either a difficult or toxic family member or in-law is key, especially. So let yourself become that. It's much like the moving into the okay exercise that I proposed in a past article I have on siblingestrangement.com. And it's about letting yourself go into that place. So that's really, really important to be able to, of course, experience that, right?
And the way to do it actually is to pause. So there's this wonderful quote from Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist, and he wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's so, so true.
Yeah, it's that pause. And yeah, actually, I wrote in my book, Brothers, Sisters, Strangers, that in that crucial space between stimulus and response, I tried to completely reconstruct my relationship with my estranged brother.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's great. That's great that you're able to do that, right? It's so, so important. So, and of course, if there's a willingness on their part, especially, that's the other side to it too, right? They need to want it too, you know?
Right. I mean, it's not for everybody for sure, but
Yeah,
I recognized that I was having trigger reactions to him, which weren't about him, and they were just being they were preying upon the relationship.
yeah, I agree. I agree. So it's good that you recognize that and you were able to empower yourself accordingly. So, all right, well, we're just about out of time, Fern. So I just wanted to talk about resources. Now, what would be the number one resource that you would like to talk to our viewers about?
So I wanted to show you, I have a new cover for the Sibling Estrangement Journal. You can't see it very well, but it's quite beautiful. And I
Yeah,
would, especially talking about triggering, this is a great opportunity for you to get some awareness, name your triggers and core beliefs. And so this journal helps you understand yourself better through writing.
it is so, so wonderful to have, and it's a great resource. I do highly encourage our viewers to take a look at that, of course, and to get a copy if they can. And my number one resource, I think, at this time is quite simply the Sibling Estrangement Support Group. It seems to be going very strongly right now. And I'm getting more and more people asking about it, writing me, and just wanting to be a part of that. And of course, it is a very safe space that people can go into. You've been a part of the group, of course, and you've seen in some ways what it does. And of course, people feel less alone and they feel empowered, especially at the end of the group, leaving with much more, some tools, some strategies, a sense of community, which is so, so important for us. So I really, really think that's a good resource for our viewers. So
I'd like to close with a poem I wrote.
sure.
When I was in my darkest moments with triggers, I wrote something called The Joker, which is the trigger itself. So it's quite short, but I'll read it to you.
Yeah, sure.
The
Go ahead.
Joker drop the Joker drops in, an uninvited guest. I don't know she's there. Quick in her soft leather shoes, she hides behind every conversation, sabotaging the present with memories of my shrouded past. She delights in duping me. I respond to what's not there. Hers is a game of major look. I fall for her antics every time. Rage pulses through me. My in-breaths get stuck. Feelings drain from my feet, severing myself from myself. I trust no one, especially me. Is that her laugh or her black cape flickering? Unsure, I wonder, who am I talking to? What year is this? How old am I? I am her fool.
Wow. So, so powerful. I love
Great to be
that.
with you. And thanks so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about something that unfortunately I know dearly.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing this, Fern, and we'll certainly connect again for some more future episodes on sibling estrangement. So thanks again for doing this, and I'll talk to you very soon, okay?
Great. I look forward to it.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Right.